Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Evaristo, the first presenter for this session, and the title of my presentation is Shaping the CBFM Narrative in the Past Decade Using NVIVO. This study is one of the knowledge products of my previous project entitled Assessing the CBFM Program Through Stocktaking and Forest Fragmentation Analysis. This study in particular focuses on the stock-taking component of the said project. So without further ado, let's start. Essentially, my presentation is simply divided into four parts: the brief rationale, methodology, key findings, and conclusion. So first, let's discuss what is the CBFM program. The Community-Based Forest Management, or CBFM, is a program that integrates all the previous people-oriented forestry initiatives in the country and institutionalize it as the national strategy for attaining sustainable forestry and social justice in the Philippine forest lands through the promulgation of EO 263. So fundamentally, the local communities who were identified as the de facto managers of our resources were given the right to occupy and utilize the said resources in exchange for its protection and conservation. This is done through the CBFM agreement, or CBFMA, which is a 25 years tenurial instrument renewable for another 25 years. So, with approximately 51% of the CBFMA expiring in the next 5 years, it is imperative to capture what truly happened in the first phase of its implementation, which reflects the timeliness and relevance of this study. So, moving on to the methodology. In this study, we both use peer-reviewed materials such as books, journals, and gray literature like master's or PhD dissertation that were acquired either online or offline. The collated literature were then cleaned through the exclusion of duplicates and conversion of library materials into text-readable file. This process is represented by the first horizontal arrow. So proceeding on the next one, using the NVIVO 12 Plus, a qualitative data analysis software, the clean materials were classified based on literature types, whether it's journal, books, etc., the year of publication, and the theory of change theme, which is the policy and institutional, biophysical, and socioeconomic themes. These were then reviewed to determine the persisting themes and coded accordingly. Afterwards, the codes were further reviewed to remove duplications, and once finalized, we proceeded to the data visualization represented by the second arrow, which produces the following output. So the core outputs of this study is the trend analysis of the community-based forest management program in the Philippines and the assessment of its incentives and disincentives. So proceeding to the key findings, the origin of the CBFM program dated back to the Marcos era when the first people-oriented initiatives were initiated. But as you can see in the figure, it was only during the 1990s that Philippine forestry have a shift to a new paradigm, replacing the highly centralized and capital-oriented forest management with a more participatory approach, which regarded the communities as partners in sustainable forest management rather than the culprits of forest destruction. You can also see here in these figures how the government have started giving supports to the local communities through the implementation of the CBFM program. So, focusing on the incentives or benefits of CBFM, the review of 92 CBFM related materials verified that the program had yielded multiple benefits to the local communities, with the majority being policy and institutional in nature. This positively affects the biophysical condition of the area, but nonetheless, it was not a smooth sailing process as many challenges were found to arise from the field, which will be further explored in the following slides. So what this slide essentially shows is the emerging challenges or the disincentives. So as seen in this figure, the disincentives of the CBFM program is a byproduct of the interplay between institutional, political, socio-economic, and biophysical factors, which often resulted in the failure of enterprises as well as a lower revenue. Particularly, the delayed or suspension of harvesting permits which results to tenure insecurity, the absence of alternative livelihoods, and weak marketing supports were the recurring preeminent factors hindering the CBFM program. In essence, the sustainable livelihoods and income of the local communities are significantly undermined by the weak institutional and policy support towards social enterprise development, which is simply exacerbated by the biophysical factors such as the occurring of natural calamities and other drivers of deforestation. So, delving deeper on the disincentives of CBFM, the lack of or decreasing support to CBFM POs emerged as one of the prevailing issues that affect the CBFM program implementation, which was accentuated by 50% of the reviewed materials. This echoes how the absence of a continuous support system is detrimental to the sustainability of the program. Other key specific issues include the limited government assistance and lack of dedicated DNR field personnel for the program, despite it being recognized as the national strategy. So, moving on, the literature produced on community forestry in the Philippines continued to decline during the assessment period, which is reflected in this figure. It signifies essentially the waning interest of the scholars on the subject matter, particularly starting from 2006 onwards. And this might be due to the international attention given to emerging and more urgent environmental issues such as climate change and disaster risk reduction management, etc. Hence, the change in the national government interest and focus. This might also be the cause of the observed waning support to the CBFM program, which coincides with the findings from the previous slide. So, in conclusion, considering the incentives the program managed to achieve despite facing many barriers, it can be concluded that CBFM is still the best option to sustainably manage and the remaining forest resources while improving the socio-economic well-being of the local communities in the next 25 years. But to do so, the identified disincentives must first be addressed. To overcome the disincentives of the CBFM program, concerns related to insecure tenure and unsustainable livelihood should be first addressed to empower the local communities. And this will only be achieved through enabling policies, enhance and sustain institutional support system matched with the sustained commitment of all stakeholders. Because after all, the protection and conservation of our remaining natural resources is a responsible of the country, not just the local communities. So that's all for me. Thank you very much for listening and have a great afternoon. Thank you.